Um, Great. Well, thank everyone here for joining us today. We are looking forward to a good conversation. This is mostly going to be about you and your needs, but I think to start things off, we should probably introduce ourselves, go into our histories a little bit to give you some context about where we are coming from, because everyone has a unique path, and those paths bring a lot of different perspectives to the table. I'll kick it off really quick, and then I'll throw it over to you all to introduce yourselves. So my name is Jeff Simeon. I am currently the Associate Director of Programs and Product Management at Boston University. We have a software application innovation lab over there where we build software for researchers at BU. And you can think of it as an in-house software development shop at Boston University. My background is in startups. I used to work for Mass Challenge, a startup accelerator. Before then, I worked for a company in town called Yesware as a product manager. And before then, I was in California working on my own small scale startups and integrating with that community out there. I have been involved in hiring engineers and finding co-founders in the past. And even though my background is in product management, I have written enough in several different languages to be dangerous. You do not want me writing code for you unless it's in your own small scale startup when you really need everybody to pitch in every different way. So that's my background. And now we're going to throw it over to our panel members to talk about who they are and how did you get here, and then talk a little bit about what is your current role. So we'll pass it off to Erica. We'll kick it off.
Oh, sure. Great. Hi, my name is Erica Kangas, and I currently serve as Director of Engineering for a Boston-based startup called LearnLux. And at LearnLux, we build the technology that powers financial wellness as a workplace benefit for some of the most diverse and dispersed workforces out there. As far as my background goes, I was never someone who ever intended to go into tech. I never intended to become an engineer. That was just never on my horizon, never on my radar as something that I thought I would want to do. And so when I came out of school, I studied math, I studied econ, loved working with numbers and statistics. And so I found myself working as a data analyst in the nonprofit sector. And that was the whole reason I moved out here to Boston. I moved out here to work for the National City Year Evaluation team, doing data analysis around figuring out how can we show and talk about our impact as an organization using data, numbers, and whatever evidence that we have as an organization. And given the scale of impact that this national education nonprofit was having, this was really, really, to me, such an incredible experience, because it was really this front seat view into being able to actually see the tangible impact that our organization was having. Like with data, I could just see this tangible impact that we're having across the entire country in school communities all over the country. And I thought this was incredible. And I was like, everyone has to know this. Everyone has to know how amazing this organization is and how big of an impact we're making. But what I found at the time was that no one was excited to open an Excel spreadsheet. I could email off an Excel spreadsheet and no one was like, woohoo, an Excel spreadsheet. And so at the time I was like, oh, well, what if only I could put this data up on a website and anyone with an internet connection could just see this information in a user-friendly way and really, truly, deeply understand just what kind of impact we were having. And luckily, being in Boston, we live in this incredible, incredible tech ecosystem. And so, I started going to meetups at the time. And there was one meetup in particular where it was the Pi Ladies group, and it was this group of women who were interested in working with Python. And I happened to hear from someone there saying oh, there's this thing called bootcamp programs. And I was like, that's the skill set I need. And that's going to be this incredible way to this is the way to make an impact and to scale this. And so I ended up kind of making that transition out of my role as a data analyst out of the nonprofit world, attended a bootcamp program. And pretty much ever since then, I've been serving on engineering teams in the Boston area, mostly for seed Series A startups, really in the Boston ecosystem. kind of in a range of domains. And I think that's one of the I think thrills that sometimes we get as an engineer, is that we really do get that flexibility to work across a lot of domains. And so I've been lucky to be able to have that experience pretty much ever since having that educational experience for me. So and here we are. So
cool.
Pass it on to you.
All right, that's awesome. I'm going to talk completely opposite of what Erica has done. She moved from data to engineering. I moved from engineering to data. Hi guys. Neerav here, CEO for OnPoint Insights. We're a small company. I lead team of data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, and software developers. We work with mid-size and large enterprises and also startups, both on the data space and the software development space. From the client perspective, it works out well because we are a one-stop shop where they can get the data skills and also software programming and development skills, because many times they want to integrate, right? So as Erica said, right, their data analytics stuff onto an internal web app or a mobile app and want to roll out in with their applications or products and things like that. I was an engineer. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I started my path as a chemical engineer, process engineer to be precise. Again, great ecosystem, being in Boston for a biotech life science professional, right? So I started at a biotech company based in Cambridge. They had a manufacturing in Chelsea. So being in graduate school, sleeping at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., my life changed, that I was waking up at 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. to go from Lowell, where I went, UMass, to Chelsea, and starting the batch process runs. The company was making inhaled insulin. So in collaboration with Eli Lilly, if you know, Eli Lilly is one of the top pharma, and 100 plus years of history with insulin and those kind of therapeutic drugs. Anyways, luckily I was laid off in 4 months. That was the best thing to happen. I knew after that what I don't want to do in life, right? So sometimes things work out awesome because process engineering was not my cup of tea. I'm more of an analytical mindset person, not a handy person. And as a process engineer, you need to fix valves and pumps and all those things. My wife can adhere to anything breaks in the house. She's the one fixing it, not me. So anyways, that worked out perfectly. I worked into automation because my background was process control in manufacturing as part of my master's thesis. So I thought process control was my interest. Theoretical process control and engineering, like real life, is completely different. Okay, theoretical sounds more exciting, using neural networks and Laplace transforms and mathematics and all that. But when you start going to industry, those programs and interfaces were from little bit old school and things like that. Anyways, lucky for me, 4 years into it, I got interviewed for a statistical modeling company. I didn't know anything about the data aspect of it, but they wanted to hire a chemical engineer who knows life sciences. So I went for a dinner with the founders of the company, and they offered me a job. I was as puzzled as it was like, what? I got an offer, and they're like, yeah, come on board. We'll teach you everything about data. I'm like, okay, sure. In my mind, I'm thinking this is like when Lehman collapsed. I'm like, gone. What was I thinking? Now I'm looking back. Lehman collapsed on 19 September, something like that, 2008. My first day was October 1st, 2008. Somehow I survived because that business unit was a profit making, and then didn't go through crazy round of layoffs. I worked there for 7 years, learned everything about multivariate data analytics, what we call sometimes now machine learning and AI. There are still statistical methods used from ages. So did a lot of product consulting, working with clients, helping clients on that. And 8 years ago, ventured out on my own. So that's the path, opposite to Erica, moving from engineering to data side of it.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So part of the reason why I wanted you to know who's up here today is because, as you can probably hear, we're on the other side of it. Like, we are now in a position where we are doing the hiring when those opportunities arrive. We all work for fairly small organizations. BU is a big organization, but our unit inside of it's fairly small. You all both work for startups that are fairly small. And So we might be a different perspective from you. And as a product person, I understand that while I bring my own intentionality and thought processes to anything that I do, the real definition of success is usually not defined by me, but defined by the people who are in the audience for whatever it is that I'm creating, right? So I'd like to spend maybe just a little bit more time talking about what we've seen be successful, how we've done a hiring process on our side, so you can kind of have a peek behind that curtain. But I'd really like to spend as much of the time as possible talking to you all. I was hearing some of you before the session started talking about some of the problems you're facing. We can offer advice, things that worked for us in the past when we were more in the same role as you are, things that we haven't found to be successful for us. And also with humility, recognizing that the world has probably changed since we were in that position as well. So there might be other things that you all can learn from each other as well in this room about defining and finding your own path. The main thing to note is, like, I have a degree in psychology and a master's degree in environmental science and management. And I use that to start mobile app startups and then use that to become a product manager at companies in Boston. It is not a regular path. And if you feel like you're on this path that doesn't really match up with like engineering, then that's okay. Because that's kind of that's how a lot of us get into this space, especially when you're talking about startups. So just to quickly talk about something that we have seen in our own lives now that we are on the side of hiring or looking for co-founders and that sort of stuff. I want to ask you all, how much hiring have you done? And what are you looking for to determine if somebody is a good fit to work for your organization based upon your needs right now? So I'll throw it over to Nora first this time.
Oh, for me, okay, yeah. We have learned the hard way, being a small company and hiring. In fact, I've taken myself out of the interview process because my track record is abysmal. I've fired more than hired, and so literally it's like till the time the final signature is required and final meet and greet. The problem is that I was trusting more because people coming from experience, and eventually we learned the hard way that we streamline the process, create a standard like a test for the candidate, because we are in the data team or software team, create a standard test, whatever the domain is, if data scientist, then mix of Python, Tableau, Power BI. If it's on the development side, like a hacker rank or something like that, then give enough time, right? They can take a week, whatever time they want, come back and just explain us in plain language, right? At least on the data side of things, like what they have done, what the thought process is. And we have found some of the recent better candidates through that process. We hired somebody who was tutoring, again, no engineering degree, nothing, has not even done data, but person was just like a math tutor for like 6-7 years, had never done Tableau before the assignment. Guy figured it out, did like a decent dashboard, was able to explain his thought process. We hired him and turned out to be really amazing. We have looked at resumes and we have got people on board, both on the interview and in company with like experience at a bigger organization. That hasn't worked well because we are primarily a consulting organization. So even now our analysts and solution architects and all, when they are hiring, they know that okay, what's required for somebody to be successful at a smaller organization than at a bigger organization, right? The problem happens when that misfit and nobody's happy. And it has nothing to do with whether we are good or they are good. Both sides of the table, both are great, but there is a misfit.
Yep.
And that is not right for us to do that to anybody. So we have learned those lessons the real hard way, and we try to do justice to anybody who's interviewing with us.
Yeah. So in my experience, I feel like those soft skills can be really, really underrated in engineering interviews. Like, I feel like, especially as engineers, we tend to like invest a lot of our time and energy into practicing like the really, really technical pieces. But especially in a lot of the like startup roles and startup interviews that I've experienced, like those soft skills and your ability to communicate is just so, so important, just because you are in a very you tend to be in an environment that has a lot of ambiguity. So that's something that we look for a lot, is trying to explore someone's ability to handle ambiguity, because that's I think that would be like one of the biggest kind of differentiators for folks, like really hitting their stride in a startup environment versus having more challenges in that kind of environment, just because there's less structure, there's just less structure around your roles. So one thing we've definitely tried to emphasize is things like communication skills and someone's ability to really like handle and be comfortable with ambiguity.
Yeah, when you work for a smaller organization, you tend to wear more hats, and that is not always the most comfortable situation for people who are deeply technical. Sometimes it's more comfortable to go into a larger organization and work on your corner of a very large and complicated thing, and to apply yourself in that way. When you come into a startup, you might be hired for one job and you end up doing another job, and that's pretty common. And part of why smaller organizations are looking for people with that flexibility is just an acknowledgement of, startups being temporary organizations in search of a business model. And when you're in search of a business model, you think you know what problem you're solving. You think you know the product that you need to deliver in order to solve that problem. And you're trying everything you can to validate that and to make money while you're doing that. But if you are not successful at that, you're going to have to change what you're doing. And sometimes that means changing the people that you're working with. And other times it means asking the people who are already on the team to take on different duties than they expected to. And that's just the reality of being in sort of a really small organization, or particularly in a startup, versus being in a larger organization where there might be more defined roles and responsibilities. I will say a shortcut that I have used in many interviewing situations, which also is kind of a soft skills one, for better or worse, is I typically do a reverse interview where I start out by, okay, I'm here to evaluate you. We know that. Like I'm the hiring manager, whatever. Sorry for hitting the mic. But I like to start with a reverse interview to say like, okay, you got here. What questions do you have for me? Right. And for me, I know this puts people on the spot. So it's a little uncomfortable, but having the humility to recognize that even if you read the job description, even if you combed through the website, even if you went on people's LinkedIn profiles and looked at who they were, you really don't know anything about the work that you're going to be doing until you are actually in the room with the people who are doing the hiring. And so I like to flip the script and be like, what questions do you have for me? And like, it can be anything from like, what hours do people usually come into the office? What are the expectations? How many hours a week are you guys typically putting in? Like, this is very important stuff for quality of life and expectation setting. When you're working at a startup, sometimes you're going to be cranking out 80-hour weeks for multiple weeks in a row. When you work for a university, you don't really do that much. But you might occasionally have to do a weekend or something like that, right? So like understanding what the role is, understanding what team you're integrating into. You don't really know anything when you come into that room. And so it's good to have a few questions in your back pocket, even if those questions don't happen at the beginning of the interview the way that I typically make them start at the beginning of the interview.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, do you want to say something about that?
Right? People underestimate the value of the team they are going to be in.
Yeah.
If you're going to, I've been lucky in my career before starting my company, in the 2 companies which I worked with the smartest people possible. I always think so lucky that, I'm not the smartest person, but how did I end up working with such smart people in my career?
Right. Well, and I also think part of it is for me that having the curiosity is one of the things that I'm looking for. And it's really hard in a job interview situation to admit ignorance, right? And that's when you, like, having a question is admitting that you're ignorant to something, right? Because you're trying to put on this front of like, I know exactly what I'm doing. And so that's why I put people on the back foot a little bit in those interviews. And I've, especially for me, since I'm usually hiring in more product roles or engineering teams for small teams, like very small teams, I need people who are curious about what they are going to actually be working on. So that's been a shortcut for me. So being prepared with that, I think, is very helpful. So in that vein, I've got a couple more notes and questions and things that we can get into if there are no questions from the audience, but I would love to open it up to you all to see if in this moment there are questions or struggles or things that you would like us to think about how we can bring our experience to bear on it and help you on your journey. Is there anybody out there? I'm always looking for curiosity.
You can raise your hand. That's okay.
Yeah, you can stay there, raise your hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm really early on in my career.
Yep.
But I've been noticing that when they post entry level jobs and so forth, those are the ones that are small and the very competitive ones. So I would have positioned myself for success in terms of like finding my next role. Any advice in terms of that, or how to identify them?
You're volunteering here.
I am volunteering here.
Are you growing your network?
I am.
Okay. How many people in this room have found a job because of somebody that they knew? Okay. So it turns out that something like 70% of jobs are found by somebody that you know. And this is a really harsh reality.
Yeah. Nothing.
Because if it doesn't come as naturally to you to network, it's hard. It makes it really hard. But I think that is a really important entry point. Once the job is on the website, there's 500 people applying to that job, right? So if you know somebody in there that can put your resume at the top of the stack, introduce you to somebody, find a job before it's posted. That is really one of the most successful routes. And I'll throw it over to Erica to see if you have any insights on that as well.
Which piece?
On finding a job through a connection or like how
Finding
important it
jobs
is to network or things that you can do to network.
So, I mean, on the networking side, I mean, there are so many communities to take advantage of and to kind of put yourself out there. I know COVID has kind of dampened some of the meetup kind of vibes in Boston a little bit, and hopefully we'll see some of that come up. But whether it's in person or online communities, so for example, like there are communities like Women Who Code Boston, Women in Tech. I'm forgetting so many. There's like Boston JavaScript, Boston Python, Boston like. There are just so many like tech communities within just Boston alone, and that's not even like starting to look outwards into all of these online communities. But people like it's just an incredible ecosystem to be able to tap out there. So like whatever resonates with you, whether it's particular technologies or particular projects. Code for Boston. That's another great local community to tap into if you're looking for experience and getting to connect with folks. But it's kind of like find what resonates with you, whether it's some of these like affinity groups or whether they're like technology based groups or themed groups. Like I'm sure they're like like Boston Ed Tech. There's a Boston Ed Tech group if you are interested in education. Like this is such a thriving city. You don't even need to go out of Boston to find some really, really amazing communities to tap into.
I also want to tag back to you a little bit because I think, we talked about the difference. I'm an extremely extroverted person, and we talked about how you're an introvert. And in our previous conversation, you brought up sort of how you had to have a mentality shift to start attending these meetups, and you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was mostly around like managing my own guilt or around I would go to these events, and I would always feel this like real pressure to network. It was like I gotta network, I gotta meet as many people as I can, so that I can land that job. And then I would get to an event and I'm like, man, it's kind of late and there's pizza over there and that looks pretty tasty. And there's going to be this really interesting talk on this thing that I came here really like, I mostly wanted to see this talk. And then I would feel guilty walking out because I was like, man, I didn't really feel like talking to people. And so I just had to, recognize and kind of tell myself, you know what, that's okay. The important thing is you went out there, you saw that talk that you really want, and you learned something new. And if you happen to meet someone out there and you happen to network, or have a good conversation with a person or two, that's great. But like, reconcile with yourself, like what is it that you really want when you're going out to, like, whether it's a talk like this or whether it's a meetup. What is it you're looking for? Maybe it is for networking, and you want to put yourself out there, then that's great. Do that. But if it takes a toll on your energy, on how you're feeling, then like that is okay too. Like it is okay.
Even extroverts don't want to talk to people sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
same.
Like I've
Yeah.
gone to plenty of meetups where I'm like, "Ooh, I should be meeting people," and then I just find myself shoving the pizza in my
Yeah.
face, and then like looking around the room, being like, "Oh, I didn't do the thing."
Yeah.
Forgive yourself for that, right? Like you are flexing those muscles, you're putting yourself out there, and sometimes you're not in the right mentality to actually talk to the person that's sitting next to you, and other times you will be, right? And sometimes the talk will be so interesting you can't help yourself from talking to the people that are next to you. Do you have any other insights you want to share about that?
It is tough, but people overthink, I think, networking, that you have to go and sell yourself and schmooze and all that stuff. It's not, somebody sitting out there is a normal human like you and I. They have some interest, especially themed events or like Pi group or our group. You already know something about it, or you are at least trying to learn something. Somebody knows more about it. So there are like common themes to talk about. So it's not like out of the blue you have to talk about like Red Sox or Patriots game or something like that, right? Or how are your kids or something, right? Okay, you can still stick to R or Python and talk about it, right? And there are other ways, right? Like whatever school you graduate, right? Yesterday I was there on Monday for a panel. There were a couple of students from Northeastern. So I'm, like, you are Husky, your alum are Huskies. That's a good start or a good conversation to begin with, right? And don't approach just for like, hey, I'm looking for a job, right?
Yeah.
Many times I go to events and that's how I learn, right? You just connect two different people. You are looking for a job. I'm not looking for a job. Somebody else is looking for an engineer. Just connect with them, right? They'll probably benefit and all. People forget that part of networking. Networking is not all about you. How you can help somebody.
Sure.
Probably that person will come back in 5 years or 10 years to help you, or might not. That's okay. But yeah.
Right.
Your point about schools, I know there are some boot camp folks here, and so one thing that I remember coming out of my boot camp that I did when I was starting to figure out what is the situation here as far as the job market goes, was one thing that I thought was helpful was trying to take a look out there and see where are the alumni of my boot camp program, like what companies are they at, and also which companies like have a history of hiring boot camp grads, because that is like pretty concrete evidence that there's probably a team or a company there that is very open-minded and wants that kind of talent. And so that was kind of one signal that I used coming out of my boot camp program to kind of give me signals that this would be an environment that's like welcoming to the skills and experience that I bring to the table.
Great. Thank you so much. I saw another hand up, but I don't remember exactly where it was. I think was it you? Yeah. What's up?
Question in the back. I'm going to bring you the mic.
Okay. Do you want to reiterate it just so we can?
Hi, everybody. So like, I'm also a career transitioner, and definitely trying to focus on the networking, but sometimes there's still times when I have to rely on my materials. So my portfolio and resume, and maybe even use that to introduce myself. And I can't help but feel sometimes like, the people I'm presenting this information to, they still kind of automatically scan for experience and degree, and maybe they'll have a little bit of trouble kind of making sense of transferable skills or things like that. So in lieu of those things, I guess for organizations that are open to career transitioners and bootcamp grads, like how would you recommend organizing experience or maybe prioritizing certain types of projects, or, like what would you emphasize on like those presentable materials?
So, well,
Yeah,
so
no,
I
go
think,
for it.
so I think it depends. I think it depends on the role that you're applying for, and it depends on the company that you're applying to. So, for example, like one thing that like when I'm talking with folks who are making like career pivots into engineering, like one thing that I'll typically explore with someone is like, well, tell me more about your background, because like I think one of the things that I most commonly see from people who are making a career pivot is that they underestimate their previous life. Like, never underestimate your previous life. So, for example, like a really common example is that I'll see a lot of teachers coming out of the teaching profession who want to come into software engineering. And so it's kind of like, well, don't discount that. Like there are so many incredible ed tech companies out there that like could really like that will like latch on to that kind of experience. Or, maybe it's someone coming from like service or retail, like apply to those like people building technology for retail, for service industries, because you can't like it makes such a it'll make, for example, like things like if you're writing a cover letter or an email to someone at the company, like it makes it that much more compelling when you're able to connect those. Like you're going to have to connect the dots for those people because they're looking at a million resumes. So like you kind of got to do that dot connecting for them. And so when you're able to like take advantage, like, dig into the like bowels of your experiences and connect those dots and try to like, especially when you're seeing those opportunities that have threads of relationships to your previous life, like connect those dots and then send that out there and make it crystal clear about like, this isn't just about like my, however many weeks I spent in my boot camp program. Like this is, I also have this other like previous life of professional experience that is also going to be valuable to this role.
Yeah, no, just to add, right? You in today's day and age, like, anybody transitioning or even from the same domain, guys are so lucky, right? And I tell my students I teach at Tufts as an adjunct, right? Like in the data program, you have GitHub. Like if they are doing Tableau, Power BI, you can create your public profile. You can simple click and drag. You can create your own website on WordPress. Put the portfolio. When we are hiring engineers, data side, we on the software side, we always ask them for their GitHub and what other fun projects they have done, right? That fun projects are not going to translate to what industry projects you have done, but those fun projects at least gives us an insight that you took the initiative to do something on your own, to learn something on your own and put showcase out there.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody doesn't have anything on GitHub, I get skeptical that they haven't done anything, right? Same with students. I tell academic projects, okay, that's fine. Just put academic projects on GitHub. Start doing something more, right? So it builds up, right? You're never going to have 50 projects on GitHub in 1 month, but you're going to have 50 projects in 5 years, even after starting your first job or your career transition, right? So you are building that portfolio up always, and whatever domain you use it, ed tech, right? Ed tech is awesome because there is so much open data for ed tech. You can build anything you want, basically, right? In industry, okay, if you're going for biotech or life sciences, you might not be able to find data, but there are so much open data, open projects, right? So much you can help out with or work on your own. I think that's what, right? In fact, emphasize that primarily at the top. I tell again, back to my students, put your GitHub link, whatever it is, or your website or whatever you have created, right up at the top. After your name, that should be there. Forget about whatever you put on your resume, right? That showcases.
I think the big part is that it's artifacts,
Yeah.
right? Like what do you have that you can demonstrate that you will be bringing either direct or transferable skills to the role, right? I'm a product person. I've launched 2 small apps. Those apps no longer exist on the App Store. I still have my website up from one of those apps that I was working on. I still have screenshots and usage data and all the other sorts of things for one of those other apps that no longer exists. I use Archive, the Internet Archive, to link to websites that I developed as an independent developer that no longer exist. But I had customers way back when they needed a website. I built it. There's evidence for it. It's really about bringing whatever evidence you can to bear. And this is one of the things, I hire somewhere between 6 and 10 interns every summer, usually from the BU populace. to work with us at the Software Application Innovation Lab. And one of the things we do for their professional development is we make them at the end of the summer do a presentation. And I'm like, take screenshots of the things that you've made, right? Be able to talk about it. Talk about what part of the thing that you worked on, like you did yourself. Everybody knows that you're working on group projects. A company is a group effort. Startup is a group effort. We all know that you have your own unique contribution that you brought to the table. Don't show up and say, I built this app, right? Say like, I did X, Y, and Z on this project, and here's the evidence I have of that. GitHub's a great one. I volunteer sometimes with a group called Resilient Coders, and they're trying to help people who come from non-traditional backgrounds or are not as affluent to get into engineering. And one of the things that they bring up is like, when you're working multiple jobs already, just to try to put food on the table, like you're not going to have a GitHub profile. It's still worthwhile thinking about how you package up the artifacts, whatever it is that you're creating, and bringing your full self to that and not discounting your previous experience. Even if it's what you worked for a terrible company and you hated them, just being able to talk about what it is that you did there and the contributions you made and demonstrating that is really important. Thank you for bringing that up. I don't think we answered it at all. Do you have a follow-up?
I do, but I don't want to monopolize if anybody else wants to go.
Any other questions out there? All right, we'll come back to you and then we'll open it back up.
Here you go. Yeah, so I heard you mention internships, and that's something I've kind of had an interesting time kind of looking for work. Once again, as a career transitioner with like a non-traditional background, I've run into a lot of really, really cool sounding internships and apprenticeships that just look perfect for what I want, which is a place to kind of learn and grow and, you know, asking for the same kind of skills that I have. But kind of across the board, it seems I run into the same requirement front and center, which is must be enrolled in a university program and graduating, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, it like immediately kind of filters out these people who are career switchers that don't have the years of experience to make it into an, you know, a entry level role, but that, you know, are not within that student population. Do all of you have opinions on that, or kind of maybe a reason as to why that is, or what somebody in a non-traditional role like myself might do to maybe still try to take advantage of those positions?
I'll quickly jump in here and say that I work for a very large bureaucratic organization, and I am incapable of convincing them to hire from Resilient Coders as much as I support their mission and want to do it. So like, even if you are an associate director or director level inside of a larger organization, sometimes your hands are tied by that university. And there are so many universities in Boston, so it makes sense that when you see internships, there's often sort of a student requirement. That said, startup land is sort of a free-for-all. I think you have to be careful because you want to be compensated for your time. And a lot of startups will try and build on the back of free interns, and that's not something that you can legally do or should do for yourself. But that's a question about protecting yourself and your efforts too. But I'll throw it over to Nirav, see if you have anything that you want to add to.
Yeah, no, that's been an inherent challenge for bigger corporations, right? They want to stick to like somebody senior or, you know, first year of masters or something like that. Obviously, we are a small company. Going back to the same example, like I talked about, we hired the guy who had done like 6 years or 8 years of math tutoring. We are a small company. We have the flexibility to do that. Bigger companies, you know, they stick to that kind of pattern. They won't even hire especially my students. Sometimes they are in the, you know, 6 months before graduation, and they won't hire even those students as interns, right? So I have no great answer like how to get out of that. But there are small to mid-sized companies, and in fact, for a career transition, that's a perfect place because you'll get to learn so much. So try to focus on small to mid-sized companies in those things. And again, network, right? Somebody you know wouldn't even bother to worry about whether you are a career transition. You think it's fit, they would call you on board.
I'm actually not sure if this is still a thing. I remember that at least like a while ago, there there used to be at least some companies that would have like some apprenticeship programs. But even then they weren't super common. So I'm not sure whether that's still around in some of these companies. I think the other thing that I would think about is looking at, one, like going straight for those entry level roles. Cause like, I know you want to learn, but you can learn and get paid at like in a, you know, like a junior or associate engineering role as well. So, you know, don't discount those because you might as well get paid to learn.
Mhm.
And then I think the other thing to consider is looking at some like engineering, like adjacent roles. So, for example, one of my mentees was someone who was also a career transitioner and was evaluating different options, and you know was offered a role as I think it was as an operations analyst. And so, you know, it would have been a foot in the door into a startup. It would have been, you know, it required a technical skill set because there was like there was very much an analytical component to it. And, you know, it was a tough decision because, you know, it wasn't exactly what she had envisioned for herself. But, you know, if you're looking for that foot in the door into a startup environment, especially if you're interested in a startup, some of those kind of engineering adjacent roles are other things to consider that could get you into that engineering roles. Because I think one thing that I have seen with, especially with startups, or well, depends on the startup, but I've definitely seen a handful of startup teams that are open to bringing someone on in that kind of adjacent role and then growing them into an engineering role once that need for like another like full-time engineer kind of opens up, because you're already familiar with the business. So if you got the technical skills, it's a lot easier to kind of usher you into that role.
Yeah, I'll say one last thing about internships. It's actually illegal to participate in an unpaid internship in Massachusetts, I think, unless you are getting credit as part of your compensation, like course credit. So it could actually be a red flag for you as somebody who's not enrolled in a university if you see an internship that requires you to be enrolled in a university, because it could be somebody who's trying to have this be an uncompensated, other than course, they have some relationship to give course credit. And I worked with Mass Challenge, so they no longer hire unpaid interns. And they, you know, that was a proud moment for me to advocate for our interns, because I think everybody should be compensated fairly. But if you're not compensated fairly, at least actually paid money to buy food and pay rent when you're doing an internship. Okay, any other questions out there in the audience? Because we can talk to you guys all day long. Yeah.
So I
And
was
then-
wondering, like for when you're showcasing your portfolio, your GitHub, like when is a lot of companies, I find they don't ever ask for it. So it's like, at what point, like when I talk to the recruiter at the beginning, should I say, hey, I did this thing on GitHub, or like during the main interview, like where do you sort of, there's the resume, but other than that, where do you bring it up?
I mean, my resume is a bunch of links. Like my resume is literally covered in blue, right? Underlined blue things that you can click on to find out more. And I say, I worked here, I did this thing, here are the outcomes, here's a link. I built this, here's a link. Here's how I built it. Here are the technical things I did. Like my resume is filled with links. I still threw that resume at a lot of companies and did not get jobs, right? But anytime I did have that conversation, oftentimes it was, oh, I followed a few of those links and it looks like you built some really great looking websites, or as a really cool idea for a company, how did you come up with it, or whatever it was, right? So like, yes, you're not going to succeed at getting through the filter for all companies on that front, but not having that and not being able to talk about that competently is a huge problem for people. Like if you work somewhere for 4 years and all you can say when you came out of there is like, well, I wrote Python. Like that's that's really not setting yourself up for success. I don't know if there's any other stories
No,
you all
that's
want to
the
tell
thing,
about
right?
that.
Just to
Yeah.
add, right?
Where
you're
can you bring a
working-
portfolio?
Yeah, you're working somewhere at the company for 4 years, and most of the time, because of the non-disclosure, you won't be able to share
Sure.
anything on GitHub about that work. So you have to build something which is out there in the open, right? Whether it's Jeff's websites and apps, or in Python code, or working with some open data, whatever domain you are, because you're always going to be restricted whether you worked at a startup or a small company. Yeah, you can write more than saying just worked at Python. Okay, or saying if you're data, then you build, using pandas library, using this, using scikit or strats or whatever it is, right? So that you can elaborate, but you won't have any final output because of the non-disclosure agreement. So you're always going to be limited by that. So if you put something out there, again, it's up to the hiring manager. We always look for it. If not, we always ask for it, whether it's a contract role or a full-time role, to bring it out so that we can always show it to our client, being a consulting organization, that, hey, the person is competent enough. We get more confidence that the person is competent enough because they are showing some about themselves on GitHub or public profile or their own website, right? It's up to, in addition to what Jeff is talking about, that you won't be filtered or half of the managers won't look at it. When you are looked at it, or somebody has looked at those links, the narrative stays with you, right? I always advise somebody who comes, like, how to interview, or my student, like, if you put those things out, even if they're academic projects or open data projects or open source projects, the narrative is with you. If there is a 1 hour interview, you control 50 minutes of it, because you have all these fun things that they don't know. Okay, if you are telling me you did this Python project, you have put it on GitHub, I don't know how much your involvement or what it was there. But if I ask one question, you can talk 15 minutes about it. So, I mean, that's what I think.
What about you, Eric? Any thoughts about like putting together a portfolio, or like where you can highlight it?
Yeah. So I think one thing that at least I've experienced is, like, especially early on, like if you're early on in your engineering career, your GitHub is going to be so, like, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it is going to be so important, because you don't necessarily have the luxury to like lean on those like workplace experiences. So that GitHub profile or whatever else you're able to contribute and put out there in the world, like, is going to just be more important. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I was saying that we really underrate our preparation on the soft skills, because, like, yes, you can spend all the hours like practicing those technical skills for that interview, but if you get in and you're stumbling, like talking about your own project, like that is not going to land in an interview, because the thing is that, like, whatever you put on your resume, like, is fair game for an interview. And so you, like, there is no bigger expert in this world on you than like you yourself. So it is your job to go into that interview and be the expert on you, be the expert on your projects. And so that's why, like, whether it's, grab a friend and practice with them, or like feel silly in front of the mirror, talking to the mirror, like whatever you have to do to like physically like get your like practice your speaking muscles, so that when you jump on that interview and when those nerves start setting in, that you at least have the muscle memory to like talk coherently about yourself, what you've done. Because that's just going to be so important. And it's really going to be like how you're able to talk about that and connect those dots in that conversation with folks. Like if it's in your resume, they'll probably look at it. So I don't know that there's, you necessarily like.
If you get past the 1 minute that most people give resumes, they're probably going to dig into whatever links you have to look at those artifacts. So having as many artifacts on your resume as possible is a great thing. I saw a question over here too, and I wanted to come to you.
More of a comment, just to kind
Hold on one second. I just want to hand you the mic so our virtual attendees can hear your question.
Yeah, just more of a comment, just to add on a little bit of what was discussed earlier. When Eric was coming up with some of the user groups that are here and affinity groups, there's a really good resource online, the Boston Area User Group Calendar, which is bugc.org, that lists a lot of them. It's a really good resource, and it's far from comprehensive. It doesn't have everyone around. I know I can think of a few that aren't on there. So that's a really good resource for anyone who's looking for some of these organizations, or such organizations that are great networking opportunities. And one additional thing that was kind of related to another comment on that is, you want the networking to be something where you're just there building relationships. And I think relative to that too, one of the cardinal sins a lot of people make is that once they've landed a new role, then they stop networking. And that's one thing you don't ever want to do. You want to keep doing that even when you're gainfully employed. I'm gainfully employed, not trying to leave my job, and I'm here in many other places. I'm going to the Boston Tech Jam tonight just to go connect with other people. So
that's great.
Just to add, there's, like I say, you should network when you don't need a job.
Dig the well before you get thirsty.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Any other questions out there? Yeah, we have one here, and then we'll come back to you, Harish. Is that okay? Hey, he's gonna let you go first. Sure.
To follow up on my other question, like what, once you have the portfolio, like what kind of things are important to have in there? Like is it good to have, I would guess more quality would be better than quantity. But like, what do people look for?
I think that's a very clear question for you all, since you're more engineering hiring
I would
managers.
say don't overthink about quality, quantity and all, right? If you've done something, put it out there, right? You can always refine it, where to put it quality, but if it's done something even half-baked, at least put it out there so it's there, especially when you're actively looking for a role or not, right? We have seen profiles where there are like 10 things, like 10 projects, like out of that 4 or 5 are great, rest of those are like not great, but at least person has kept something, done something, right? So just put it out there, it's okay, right? It's like I overthink about writing a blog post or something. That's why I just have 2 blog posts. I should be having more content, but I don't have it because I overthink it, right? But many times it's like, okay, it's there, put it out there. Obviously you can define or defend whatever you have done on the quality side of it, and if you really think it's really bad, that it's not going to reflect well on you, then that's a different story.
So would you recommend, like, could you create it like a README file to make it more approachable or that kind of thing? Would that help?
Yeah. So if you're trying to craft your GitHub profile in a way that you're hoping to like attract attention to it from folks who are hiring, I think this is like, it's a really good like exercise in empathy, right? Like put yourself in that person's shoes and like think about like, all right, this is someone who's probably doesn't have a ton of time and has no idea about like what I'm doing here. So like think about your communication and think about like trying to get that like executive summary and that README, so that if I've got like 2 minutes to look at your GitHub profile, like the first place I'm going to go is the README to say like, all right, what is this? Like, what am I looking at? And then I'm going to scan through. So that like to your point, like the README is like a really, really great place to like draw your audience in, so that they like it's kind of their roadmap to like whatever else is in that repo or whatever else is in your account.
Yeah, I found it helpful, at least in my own thinking when approaching a job, to look through my resume and maybe not change what's on my resume, but move the things that are most relevant to the front of my resume for whatever job I'm applying for. So, in the case of you're going somewhere and they're working on Python and you've done some Python, be honest with yourself about how much Python you've done, right? But putting that in the first of your long block of keywords that you're kind of keyword packing, like sticking that in there so that when people look at your resume, they do more than a 2-minute scan. Because what I'll say is, if Eric is looking at your link or your GitHub, like you're winning. Like you've already made it through a couple levels of filtering before that happens. So again, just having as many opportunities for you to demonstrate through artifacts and through the ordering of the information on your resume and in the READMEs and that sort of stuff, that you match what they are looking for, and trying to mirror the language even that's in the job description. Some places, like I've been a product manager or a project manager, or some places have product owners, like just looking at what language they use for the role and not lying, but like contextualizing your experience in whatever language that the job application is looking for, or that the job posting is looking for. So I think we're down to our last few minutes here. I think we have time for maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up. So do we want to go to Harish here?
Thank you. So you've all made transitions, as you've told, like data and engineering, development and product. So when you're in that position, when you've already had a path, and from there you're looking to move to the next steps, you would have definitely had the exposure to like the other stuff that you want to explore. So, you at least know what's the next step you want to make right at that point. So what's your advice for somebody who's in their path, they're trying to decode it, and what's your advice to not get themselves pigeonholed in what they're doing and keep themselves open, at least even internally inside the organization, so they get to explore what the other stuff that the whole organization is doing, or like outside networking is great. That's great advice. Get to the well before you're thirsty. But also inside, how do you get good exposure throughout the entire verticals of the organization, and also let people in your network know that you're not pigeonholed inside your domain, and you have transferable skills that can help you go to other verticals as well.
I will say that before I worked in technology, I was a wilderness trip coordinator and a 5-star waiter. And then I worked on sailboats in Santa Barbara County before working for local government. So that was my path before I started working in technology. And so like, I will say that passion and interest is really like, just like in your personal relationships, it's very attractive, and so being interested in whatever it is that you're trying to engage with, and being able to talk about that competently, even if you've never worked in that field, is really important, and that will shine through, right? Like if you have questions, if you bring whatever it is, even if it's just scratching at the surface of whatever the thing is, whatever the startup does or whatever that organization does, just scratching at the surface and being really interested in, I think, and being able to demonstrate that interest, I think is a really good and important thing as you're transitioning careers. I saw a hand come up, and we can talk afterwards too. I'm not disappearing. Yeah, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Yeah. So I want to thank you all very much for chatting with me and us about this. And remember, as you're networking, you have one shared experience here. Even if you thought that this talk sucked, you can find the other person who looks really grumpy at the end of this talk and talk to them about that and network that way. Okay, so thank you all very much for being here and asking your questions. It's been great.
Thank you.